Coming up, ships and sailors that have mysteriously vanished and just as mysteriously reappeared.
For centuries, reports of ocean-going ghosts and apparitions have terrorized sailors around the world.
There's hauntings because people still occupy that space because they died tragically. They died very suddenly.
Even today, respected mariners claim to be eyewitnesses to the bizarre.
There it was, in living color, I'll tell you. It was in the shape of a ship and it was burning.
Nearly every seaside village has its stories of mysterious shipwrecks and ghost ships, legends that have been passed down from one generation to the next. Most are easily dismissed as tall tales that grow taller by the year. But there are also some otherworldly sightings that defy rational explanation and leave sailors wondering whether they've entered the realm of the supernatural. Join us for Ghost Ships.
July 17th, 1996. It's a warm summer's night on Long Island. People are outside for a stroll or sailing peacefully along the shoreline. TWA's Flight 800 takes off from New York's John F. Kennedy Airport, bound for Paris. At 8:30 p.m., in the dark sky 2.5 miles above the Earth, the giant 747 explodes in a fiery flash. All 230 people aboard die. The official conclusion of the National Transportation Safety Board is that a spark in the fuel system caused the explosion. But Thomas Stalcup, an independent investigator, disagrees. Stalcup has learned that eyewitnesses reported a bright streak shooting up from the water towards the jumbo jet.
102 people saw this thing go up. 96 said it came from the surface.
Stalcup and others acquire 30 minutes of radar data from the NTSB investigation and make a startling discovery.
Here's the debris field right here, and you can see that all the debris is falling in this general area. And directly below the debris field, you'll see this is the closest ship to the crash, and it headed in a south-southeast direction at approximately 30 knots. And this ship, according to the FBI, has not been identified.
This ship of unknown origin, appearing as a radar blip, may be the source of the mysterious streak of light.
There are reports from multiple eyewitnesses that a ship was directly below Flight 100 when it exploded. These eyewitnesses saw what looked like a light on the horizon. After the crash, however, that light went out, according to one eyewitness.
In the official report, the unidentified ship has no relation to the real and known disaster of Flight 800. The questions raised by Stalcup's mystery ship may never be answered. They remain riddles added to a centuries-old collection of inexplicable seafaring enigmas.
There's a whole realm of ghostly folklore at sea, starting with forerunners, which are ghostly predictions of disaster, and there's a rich tradition of those, founded on the very fear of all those unpredictable, horrible things that happen at sea.
Since man first took to the seas, the open ocean has been as mysterious and alien as outer space. Sailors who have thought themselves mightier than the seas have paid a terrible price. After Columbus discovers the New World, sailing vessels begin to crisscross the vast oceans in search of new lands and new riches. Mariners seeking the silk and spices of the Far East sail around the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. Often battered by severe storms, navigating the Cape is a most treacherous undertaking. Here, legend says, is born the story of the most famous of all ghost ships, the Flying Dutchman. Her story begins in 1680, when a Dutch captain named Philip Vanderdecken swears a curse against God that he'll succeed in rounding the Cape if he has to keep trying until Judgment Day. The ship and her crew never return home. But they are seen again, not as flesh and bone or wood and canvas, but as a spectral vision, a seagoing ghost. Sailors return home and tell of seeing the Flying Dutchman and her cursed crew, often before experiencing a disaster of their own. They have passed down the tale that no soul aboard the Dutchman can rest unless another sailor takes its place. What fate awaits souls lost at sea? This amazing photograph provides an eerie glimpse at the possibility of something beyond our normal view of the world. In 1924, two seamen, James Courtney and Michael Meehan, die in a tragic accident aboard the tanker SS Watertown. Following their burial at sea, their faces appear in the roiling water alongside the ship. The captain grabs his camera and captures their images. Are these ghostly specters the last attempt of the departed to communicate a farewell to their shipmates? What looks like their faces are clearly visible in this 1924 photograph.
Are there other worlds? Are there fourth dimensions? I'm not afraid to say, I don't know. People disappear. They've been disappearing for hundreds of years, and these ships show up, and I think it's an incredible mystery.
When we continue, a 19th century ghost ship, the Teaser, still appears to this day in Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia.
I kept saying, Paul, I just can't believe this. We got to make sure other people see this. But there it was, in living color.
In 1813, the United States is at war with Great Britain. To help fight the powerful British Navy, the U.S. government grants American civilian vessels the authority to attack British ships. These ships are called privateers. The government license, or letter, makes these sailors, in effect, pirates.
So you get these very dramatic chases that last hours, sometimes days, of one vessel trying to outsail another. Finally, they draw near enough within cannon range, and the privateer usually only fires a few shots across the bow of the enemy vessel. And that's usually it. In most privateering battles, it's a remarkably bloodless form of warfare. Usually you're attacking merchant ships that don't have a lot of guns, don't have huge crews, and they'll very quickly surrender.
A very successful privateer is the Dash, a fast schooner prowling the Maine coast.
From the minute it was launched, it was a very lucky ship. I believe they had 7 voyages and actually 15 bounties collected. And so obviously on more than one tour, they would be able to get more than one ship. The crewmen wanted to be on there for the money, but also for the prestige. It was a lucky ship.
The Dash's third captain is the recently married John Porter. While the crew prepares the ship, Porter is bidding a lingering farewell to his wife, Lois.
The ship was ready, everybody was ready. The captain wasn't there, he was with his new bride. Well, everybody said, yeah, all right, fine. You know, we can understand, lovey-dovey, but come on, we've got business to do.
Part of their business was to accept a challenge from a new privateer, the Champlain, to see which boat was faster. Finally, Captain Porter boards the Dash. Living up to her name, the Dash speeds so far ahead that the Champlain's lookout can barely spot her on the horizon. Then a furious storm kicks up. Fearing the weather, the Champlain turns back, but the Dash does not. Back on shore, the captain's wife senses trouble.
Lois and her family are in Portland. You know, it's a stormy, stormy evening, a couple days after the Dash has left, but there's a big wind that shakes the house, and there's a big crash in one of the unoccupied parlors, and then Lois goes into this parlor, and from one of the fireplaces, a tile has fallen off, and it's a tile with scripture written on it, and so she reaches down, and in her heart, she says, the Dash is lost.
The Dash never returns. But over the years, tales are told by Maine natives of the Dash reappearing out of the fog on windless days, stopping lobstermen dead in their tracks with its sudden appearance.
The people who have seen her say that the crew on deck looks like they are looking into the fog, trying to find out where they are and how best to get home.
The Dash makes her most famous ghostly return during World War II, before a pair of adulterous lovers.
On one particular afternoon when the fog was thicker than 3 in a bed, alarms went off, like that something had breached the security of the harbor, and they sprang into action. Some of them began to fire, and one of those shells landed right on the island where these two were having their afternoon tryst. Well, you can imagine, it scared the bejesus out of them, and they wondered, what is going on here? They said they saw coming out of the fog this ship. And here, I mean, there wasn't a bit of wind stirring. There was no air whatsoever. And they could hear the sails luffing as she was sort of coming about. And as she came about, they could see on the stern the name Dash Freeport.
From a port further down the coast, sailing out of New York, the Teaser takes advantage of the War of 1812 and becomes a privateer. She heads north up the coast.
Nova Scotia was a British colony at that time, so we were sort of the nearest British possession and had a very rich sea trade, which of course attracted the attention of American privateer vessels like Teaser.
The Teaser captures several ships right outside of Nova Scotia's Halifax harbor. Expressing a flair for the dramatic, the Teaser's captain, William Dobson, with his single ship, declares a blockade of Halifax. The British merchantmen and warships accept the challenge. July 1st, 1813. The Teaser is surrounded by British ships, including a 74-gun warship. At this point, Captain Dobson gives orders for the defense of his ship to his brash First Lieutenant, Frederick Johnson.
There's crazy folklore about him that suggested that he fought with a hangman's noose around his neck. The newspaper reports use words like he had the disposition of the devil. He was sort of not widely liked, had a terrible temper.
Reports vary about what happens next, but all fingers point to Johnson. Some say he carries hot coals from the ship's galley. Others say he uses a flintlock pistol. The result is the same. Johnson goes to the powder room and deliberately ignites a fire while his fellow sailors are still on board.
The Teaser erupted in a colossal explosion. Her whole powder magazine blew up all at once. And it was just a spectacular explosion. It ripped the whole deck of Teaser up and sent her mainmast crashing into the water. There were about 40 men aboard Teaser. Only 7 of them survived the explosion. It's quite literally a very explosive issue and a very dramatic one during the War of 1812, and one that has spawned generation after generations of sightings of this ghost ship.
The Teaser made a most convincing appearance to Jill and Paul Flynn, 2 residents of Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia, in 1970.
When all of a sudden we saw this schooner out there, and we talked about it, and it was in the form of a schooner on fire, burning, and then we looked at each other and said, "No, boy, that must be the Teaser."
With her deck aflame, her crew wailing, the Teaser, seemingly caught in an eddy of time, a current too strong to escape, quickly vanished.
I kept saying, Paul, I just can't believe this. We got to make sure other people see this. But there it was, in living color. I'll tell you, it was in the shape of a ship, and it was burning. I don't have any explanation. All I know is I saw what I saw.
As quickly as she appeared, she vanished. The Flynns still walk along the shore of Mahone Bay with an eye turned out to sea, but have not seen the ghost ship Teaser again. Despite technological advances in the safety and reliability of transatlantic steamship travel throughout the 19th century, tall-masted sailing ships remain the most popular way of traversing the oceans. And regardless of the experience of their captains, these large ships continue to be lost in turbulent and unpredictable storms. When a ship doesn't reach port, its owners and relatives of the crew and passengers know almost certainly that the unyielding forces of nature have gained the upper hand. But when a ship is found without any sign of the crew or even the slightest hint of their fate, human nature is unable to let the mystery rest. Such a ship is the Mary Celeste. May 1861. The Amazon, the original name of the Mary Celeste, is launched from Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia. On that very first trip, her captain dies. Stanley Spicer's grandfather, Earl Spicer, is part of the crew on the cargo ship.
And I can remember him telling this, that the first sight they saw was the bride of this young captain running down to see what they had in the boat and why they had returned. She knew that her young husband was dead.
The Amazon couldn't shake her bad luck.
And a little while later, the ship went over to England and sailing in the English Channel, and it ran into a ship and sank it. So one thing after another, there was tragedy all through its existence.
The ship changes hands several times. One owner, perhaps seeking to change the luck of the ship, changes her name from Amazon to Mary Celeste. The odds and tradition are against it.
In the Western world, we call ships she because they really have a personified identity. And for you to go mucking about with the identity of that ship, you know, a lot of mariners think that's a very bad idea.
Thursday morning, November 7th, 1872. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7 set sail from New York Harbor, bound for Genoa, Italy. Their cargo is 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. November is never a good time to be sailing on the Atlantic. November 1872 turns out to be a particularly bad time.
The reason we knew the weather was bad was that ships that were arriving in the port of New York in November reported heavy seas, gale force winds. It was a tough time in November that year.
Despite the inclement weather, things are shipshape for the first few weeks of the journey.
The log book itself shows that everything was fine up until November 24th.
And the Mary Celeste is not alone on the wide Atlantic seas. 8 days after she leaves New York, another double-masted brigantine, the Dei Gracia, also built in Nova Scotia, leaves the harbor bound for Europe. Like the Mary Celeste, she carries 10 people. On the afternoon of December 4th, 1872, the lookout on the Dei Gracia spies something in the distance.
They look at her with the spyglass, kind of see no one on board. They're probably very curious at that point. They get close enough to hail her, but no one responds.
Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Gracia sends his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, and 2 others to inspect the mysterious ship.
They probably had a very eerie feeling. You know, you climb aboard this vessel, and here in the after cabin, the skylight is open, the cabin door is open, everything is wet, not a sign of life.
DeVoe returns to the Dei Gracia and asks Captain Morehouse for permission to sail the Mary Celeste 600 miles to Gibraltar and there claim the salvage rights. Morehouse says yes to DeVoe.
He takes 2 men over to the Mary Celeste and boards her at 4 in the afternoon. Sundown is 4:39. So they had 39 minutes of light to get the ghost ship ready to sail. That's a gutsy guy.
DeVoe succeeds in sailing the Mary Celeste safely into Gibraltar. The authorities are immediately suspicious, convinced there has been foul play. There is a hearing generating 66 pages of testimony. The case makes headlines around the world.
They don't believe the story that's told by the people of the Dei Gracia.
Clearly, things don't add up. The ship has food, water, working sails, a working pump, even a sewing machine and a melodeon, a 19th century version of a portable piano. The cargo, except for a few broken barrels, is secure in the hold. They've left behind tobacco, oilskins, raincoats, and the captain's log. What's missing are the sextant, the lifeboat, and every human aboard the Mary Celeste. Captain Briggs, his wife, 2-year-old daughter, and the 7 crewmen vanished. Where did they go? A sword belonging to Captain Briggs is found on the ship. It looks like it might be stained with blood. Some speculated that perhaps pirates came aboard and kidnapped the crew. Others thought an arrangement between the captains of the Mary Celeste and the Dei Gracia had somehow gone sour, which sparked a fight. The cabins were wet with salt water. Perhaps there was a waterspout that washed the people overboard. Without proof of any wrongdoing on the part of the crew of the Dei Gracia, the court reluctantly grants a salvage award.
The court in Gibraltar believed that they were pirates and that they didn't want them to profit. So they came up with a compromise. They only awarded them a little over $8,000 on an $80,000 ship and cargo.
Over the years, the focus for a true solution to the mysterious disappearance of all aboard the Mary Celeste centers on the cargo.
She had a cargo of industrial alcohol, which has very potent fumes, and had had a patch of rough weather. And one of her hatches had been pulled open, probably to vent the cargo, and that may have sort of created a very ominous whooshing noise and a smell like the ship was about to explode. And Mary Celeste's crew probably did a temporary evacuation to let their ship vent, fearing an explosion.
The crew unrove the main peak halyard, which would give them a line about 300 feet long and 3 inches in the circumference. And they hooked a small boat onto it, and they were towing along behind.
And it could be that a gale came up at that point and simply blew the ship away. And it's a kind of a chilling thought to think of 10 people in a small boat watching their brig just sail away into the ocean. Their chances of survival are nil at that point.
It's estimated, based on the last location of the Mary Celeste in the log dated November 25th, and her location when the Dei Gracia found her on December 4th, that she sailed some 378 miles alone with no crew, a ghostly presence on the open sea. And as much as the simplest solution makes sense, other tantalizing evidence suggests another fate for the Mary Celeste.
The first mate's wife claims that on the night of November 25th, she had a dream that said that her husband had been murdered at sea. And she woke up screaming in the middle of the night. And she has no explanation but believes very much that there was a mutiny. Now, interestingly, his sea chest, her husband's sea chest, was found. In it was a letter he had started to his wife on November 25th and had just abruptly quit.
No, I think we will never know what happened. We can always keep guessing, and other people will be coming up with probably more stories and more ideas. But it is, as some writer said, since you cannot subpoena the dead, it is impossible to ever know.
A combination of nature's forces results in difficult sailing conditions and strong, sometimes vicious winds and powerful currents. Off the curving coast of North Carolina, the warm waters of the Gulf Stream flowing north collide with the cold waters of the North Atlantic, creating potentially deadly seas. Perhaps the most dangerous area is found among the shifting sands just off Cape Hatteras in an area called Diamond Shoals.
It became widely known as the graveyard of the Atlantic.
One ship stands out among the more than 2,000 that have ended their useful lives along the perilous coast, the Carroll A. Deering.
Hardly a year passes that you don't see a story in some of the newspapers around here about the ghost ship of the Diamond Shoals.
January 31st, 1921. The rugged coastline is nearly empty, except for the life-saving stations. Officials know the history of lives lost along this stretch of sea and establish remote outposts staffed with brave men prepared to risk their lives to save others. Just after sunup at 6:30 a.m., one station spies a ship.
Surfman C.P. Brady is stationed at Hatteras Inlet and notes a schooner, all sails set, stranded on the Diamond.
4 different life-saving crews attempt to reach the ship through the tumultuous waters.
And they can't get closer than a quarter mile to the ship. And because it's still shrouded in mist, they can see that it is a large schooner. They can see it has 5 masts, but they can't identify the name.
The ship is discovered, and there it is just kind of sitting out there. So from the very beginning, it's got this appearance, this ghostly appearance.
And they saw no sign of life. There had been no indication of any kind of distress signal, so they had to go back to shore. And they had to wait, I think, 4 days before they could go out there and actually identify the vessel.
When they do return, they learn that the ship is the Carroll A. Deering. But it's what they don't find that is mystifying, unexplainable, and ominous. There is not a soul aboard. The ship is deserted.
They seem to have vanished in a hurry. Food is in the galley, on the stove, on the table, and there's no evidence of what happened.
The lifeboat is missing, and there is a ladder over the side, but there is no sign of the crew. There are what some might call signs and portents preceding the Carroll A. Deering's entry into the small club of ghost ships.
At that time, the captain and part owner of the Deering was William F. Merritt, and his son S.E. Merritt was the first mate on board. And when they signed on the crew, Merritt stated that he did not feel comfortable with the crew, he didn't like them, and he did not look forward to his voyage with them.
September 1920, the Deering, a cargo ship, sets out from Boston to Buenos Aires, Argentina, with a load of coal. But on their way south, they stop at Lewes, Delaware. Captain Merritt says he's sick. Both he and his son, the first mate, disembark.
We don't know if he really was sick or if something else was going on, but he gets off the boat and a new captain gets on, a Captain Wormel.
The new captain takes the ship safely to Buenos Aires and the cargo is unloaded. Returning home empty, as ships are not always able to arrange a return cargo, they stop first in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Later reports state that Captain Wormel feels the same way about the crew as did its previous captain. He shares these misgivings with fellow sea captains in Rio and later in Barbados, but continues on. Working their way up the Carolina coast, they pass lightship number 80 off Cape Lookout. The lightships are essentially floating lighthouses. A crew member hails the lightship. It is January 28th.
The crew member mentioned that the Deering had lost her anchors in a recent gale, and would the master contact the Coast Guard. The master of the lightship signaled back that he could not do so because his radio was not functioning properly, but that he would do what he could to get the message out.
The lightship master makes one crucial observation about the sailors aboard the Deering.
He commented that the crew that he observed on deck seemed to lack discipline, seemed disorganized, and were most certainly not of Scandinavian extraction. His exact words were, "small brown men of color."
It's revealed later during the inquiry that the original crewmen were all from Scandinavia. The next time the Carroll A. Deering is seen is through a spyglass on the morning of the 31st of January. She is sitting amidst the sea and spray, stuck atop Diamond Shoals. 4 days later, a captain of a salvage tug is the first to board her. He finds no bodies, no notes, no sign of anything except a hasty exit.
If a body washed up, people would have figured out, word would have gotten out that bodies washed up, and people would have figured out that they would have probably have come from the Carroll Deering, but no bodies ever turned up anywhere.
Because of the mysterious disappearance of the captain and crew and the persistence of Captain Wormel's daughter, Lulu, an investigation is launched by the U.S. State Department. A letter is written to all ports with an American representative.
Reporting the loss of the American schooner Carroll A. Deering under circumstances which are at least suspicious. The department is desirous of obtaining any information possible regarding the present whereabouts of any member of the crew of either vessel, in order to determine whether or not there has been foul play.
No trace of the captain or crew turns up. Most people still feel the fate of the doomed crew was sealed not by some supernatural cause, but by man.
I think what happened was that something went wrong on the vessel, whether it was mutiny, piracy, illness. I'm inclined to think all of a sudden they're heading for Diamond Shoals, and they figured, we better get out of here. The ship's boats were gone, and if I had been part of that crew, I probably would have wanted to get in one of those boats in a hurry and get away from there. Well, they've got the Gulf Stream going offshore. They've got the southwest wind, and it was stormy that time, going offshore. And it seems to me that it's entirely possible that they might just have drifted to sea.
Despite years of searching and sifting through the meager clues left behind, no one is able to solve the perplexing saga of the missing crew. The State Department drops the case for lack of evidence. Sometimes the bodies of those lost at sea wash ashore. Sometimes they become part of the seas themselves. The reasons for the disappearance of the captain and the crew that left the Carol Deering, a ghost ship sailing alone to her demise on Diamond Shoals, remain unanswered.
There are all these stories of seagulls being on the rigging and the masts. The racket that the seagulls were making was just an awful cacophony of bird noises, but that perhaps the birds and their sorrowful cries were the spirits of the sailors and the missing crew.
The Tokelau Islands, part of New Zealand, are administered from Apia, Samoa, about 270 miles away. Like many islands in the region, their economy is based on simple natural resources, coconuts and bananas. The oil of the coconut, made from the coconut's copra, is a sought-after commodity. In March 1955, a 69-foot fishing vessel called the Joyita sails into the small harbor city of Apia, Samoa. This one-of-a-kind boat has an interesting history. She was commissioned in 1931 by a Hollywood director and may have been the site of a starlet's murder. She was also used by the U.S. Navy during World War II. She was chartered in 1952 by a seventh-generation sea captain, an Englishman named Thomas Henry Miller, called Dusty by his friends. Miller plans to use the Joyita for commercial tuna fishing in the South Pacific. Terry Dunleavy remembers the first time he saw the Joyita and its captain in 1954.
And we met Dusty Miller, and he took us out fishing for a day on Joyita. I thought, you know, what a wonderful little ship it was. He was now on the threshold of achieving something and you know, making some money and doing the things that he liked doing, fishing and going to sea.
The life of a fisherman at the mercy of the tides, the weather, and the vagaries of an uncertain catch is not easy. Miller wanders around the South Pacific for 3 years, but both he and his boat are having problems.
It was obviously in deteriorating condition. No one was really doing any maintenance. It didn't go to sea at all during that time. So it was a shadow of its former self.
Despite her condition, the Joyita and Miller are chartered by the E.A. Coxon Company to undertake a trading trip from Apia, Samoa to the Tokelau Islands. There are staples to deliver and raw materials to pick up. 10 Tokelau Islanders also come aboard as passengers.
I have a very vivid memory. We knew that this charter had been arranged and the ship was due to sail on a Sunday at noon. It was still there when I went to bed, and I thought, oh, well, something must be wrong. But when I woke up in the morning, it had gone.
The Joyita's cargo includes 44 150-pound bags of flour, 15 70-pound bags of sugar, 11 56-pound bags of rice, empty metal drums, and lumber.
was a small boat, basically a fishing boat. Should have carried 10 people at most and had 25, and was carrying a lot of cargo as well. And the reason for that was just that there was no regular service. If people wanted to travel, they had to go on whatever boat happened to be going.
The trip should take just under 41 hours. Lloyd Webber is in the radio shack and receives a message from the Tokalaus that the Joyita had not arrived as scheduled.
No sign there, so that's when we alerted Lathala Bay, I think we've got a missing vessel. And they were in the air next day.
Giant Sunderland flying boats take to the air in a massive air rescue search. It covers nearly 500,000 square miles of ocean.
I actually managed to get aboard one of the Sunderlands and fly with them on the search. I thought I saw it a couple of times, but they turned out to be whitecaps.
After 9 days of searching and tallying 163 hours of flying time, the hunt is called off. The Joyita is given up for lost, along with all 25 people aboard.
Nobody was found. And I mean, there comes a time in any situation like that where you say, well, look, we've looked everywhere where the ship is supposed to be. It must have gone down.
Then, on November 10th, 5.5 weeks after she left Apia, the Joyita is found 600 miles southwest of her destination in the waters off the northern Fijian islands. She's half submerged, her port side completely underwater. The cargo is mostly missing. There's no sign of her 25 passengers. The fresh food and water for the passengers is still on board. The captain who found her said he didn't see any logbooks, charts, messages, nor any indication of the fate of those on board.
To me, the cardinal mystery, though, is simply the fact that they set sail from Apia, they sail north all that day, all that night, and the next day, and then disaster strikes. And we have no transcript, we have no record, we know nothing about what they did, what they said during that time. And that's quite a large mystery, to my taste.
The Joyita is thoroughly examined and photographed. They find 4 mattresses thrown over the engines. The radio is tuned to the distress frequency 2182, and yet no distress signal was ever heard. She is pumped dry and towed to Suva, Fiji. A commission is appointed to conduct an official inquiry. They choose to separate the casualty of the ship from the casualty of the passengers. They report in detail the problems on the ship throughout its fateful journey, including a deteriorating engine, fractured pipes that cause a leakage rate of 2,000 gallons of water an hour, broken pumps, and a broken radio antenna. But in the matter of the casualty of all passengers, after nearly 2 months and 300 pages of testimony, the official inquiry states they must regard the fate of the passengers and crew as inexplicable on the evidence submitted at the inquiry. There are no answers, only more questions, the biggest one being, why did they leave the ship?
Must have been terrifying for them. The sun would have set on that night something like 6:20, and we know that the boat was taking on water at quite a considerable rate and that everything happened during the night. I'm myself convinced that they left the ship voluntarily, hastily, and in poor order because they thought it was going to capsize.
Others maintain that Dusty Miller, who had once bragged to the Apia harbor master that the Joyita was unsinkable, would have never left his ship.
My first thing is that something obviously happened to Dusty Miller because he would have known that the ship would never sink. And he would have never have left it because he would have, more than anybody else, would have known that they'll be out looking for us, they'll send up aeroplanes, they'll send out ships. The best thing you can do is stay with the ship.
The crew may have believed an SOS was sent out. The radio was found to have been set to the proper frequency.
The distress message they thought they had sent or wished to have sent would have said, we're 35 miles south of the Tokelau Islands, we are abandoning ship, please send help. Had they done that, a Sunderland would have flown up from Fiji the next morning and in all probability rescued them.
Not a single trace of the passengers has ever surfaced. What could possibly have lured Miller and the other 24 passengers away from what was perhaps their best chance of survival, even with no engines and no power? Theories range from waterspouts to Japanese fishermen fearful of competition to Russian submarines to UFOs. Some claim that Dusty Miller was a communist working for the Soviet Union.
I guess you could say the Joyita is the South Pacific's Mary Celeste.
Unless someone comes forward, the truth of the Joyita and the fate of her 25 souls will remain a mystery of the sea. Another ghost ship with a missing crew, lost forever to the world we know.
45 years later, I still ask myself, what happened? What happened? We don't know.
In 1998, Prince Edward spotted an old schooner bearing an uncanny resemblance to a famous British ghost ship that had been sunk in 1878. And Edward's great-grandfather, King George, had a similar experience. He was a 16-year-old naval cadet when he wrote this ominous entry in his logbook: "At 4 a.m., the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows." The future King of England was sure he had spotted the most famous ghost ship of all.
To discover more about this or any other topic, please use our search engine at historychannel.com.